There is some solid evidence that the events of Pentecost happened right here on the stairs leading up to the temple. It was a very common area where people of all nations would gather, and traditionally rabbis were taught to discuss issues here. And since it was Pentecost, this would be a very busy area like it is today. If that's the case, then Jesus' gift of the Holy Spirit came to the disciples right here. And thus, this is the place where Christianity began. It is here where the apostles were set on fire.
Here's what the passage says in Acts 2:1-4. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound like a blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them.
From this place, thanks to Jesus' gift to the disciples, the testimony of his resurrection would spread like wildfire, from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, throughout time, across land and sea, to me.
I've had the privilege of reflecting on Jesus coming to us in the flesh, dwelling among us. As much time as I have had to walk in Jesus' shoes and try to understand his life, thoughts, and the feelings he had using the Bible, history, and archaeology as my guide, my conclusion from all of this is very simple. Wow. God came to the earth? He gave up heaven and put on human flesh and walked here through dusty streets and a world filled with suffering and confusion. He came here to die at the hands of his creation, allowing them to mock and beat him. And he did all of this to show us his love. While this all answers some questions, it brings up more questions, and I leave with a greater exclamation. Wow.
You can't put him in a box. He doesn't seem to have a plan. He just seems to go here and he goes there and he disappoints people's expectations and makes some people angry. And you've got this dynamic, alive, fluid communication and relationship that is at the very heart of everything he does.
There were so many other things that happened during Jesus' time here on earth, things that he taught that were not even recorded in the Bible. John points that out twice in his Gospels. He says, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. How dare John tease us with that? But you know what? The Bible does tell us enough.
Jesus presents himself clearly and openly and a little mysteriously at the same time. As I conclude my journey, I realize there's so much more to know and to explore. Whole books written for years to come will examine the many facets of Jesus Christ, God who came as a man in the flesh and walked among us.
We are all born blind because we're not born with the knowledge of God. And we need to be touched by Christ in order to have our eyes open to see the gospel and have a hope of salvation.
There's a verse that's been sticking out to me during this trip, and it seems appropriate right now. Philippians 3:10 from the Apostle Paul, who also reflected on the life of Jesus and came to this conclusion. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death.
I've tried to imagine what it would be like to stand next to somebody who had no vain ambition, had all genuine interest in my well-being, who never said a single self-promoting word, absolutely genuine, totally transparent, really committed to your well-being over his own, and thoroughly loved you, really loved you. He was crazy about you, thought you were the most fascinating person he'd ever met because he made you. So I think all of that comes together to create a remarkably compelling and magnetic personality.
The very notion of knowing more sets my heart on fire. So what am I doing standing around?